So today we are going to be working on this 2000 Buick LeSabre that I call Grandpa Glider. It has been leaking out of the intake gasket for quite a while. It's leaking coolant into the cylinders and oil externally all over the damn place. But with these 3800s, they really can run for a long time with them like that. But it's gotten to the point that I keep running out of coolant, and as you can see, it's been contaminated before, so I also need to flush it out. So we got the under tray out. This is looking at it actually upside down. It would be flipped over underneath the car. It's just held in by seemingly 100 of these little plastic clips. Amazingly, I didn't break any. But I was hoping for a drain on the radiator itself. However, there is none. So what I'm going to have to do is get the bucket about directly underneath this hose here, and then disconnect the hose and dump it down into the bucket. Which sucks because it's going to make a mess. It's going to hit that radiator support and just go everywhere. But try and be as clean as possible. You don't want to get coolant in your ground, especially if you're like me and on a well. I'm going to take a minute to talk about some tools that will make your life easier for doing a job like this. None of these are necessary. You can do this job without them, but they make it go a lot easier, which in turn makes it faster. These needle nose, they stay skinny with that little scissor action, and that allows you to get down to the pinch style clamp. I'll try and get to where an angle you can see it here. There it is. But you have to grab on both sides of it and squeeze it with the pliers in order to slide it back to get that hose off of there. Then these are all hose pliers. They grab around the hose, help break it loose, and help you slide it off without ripping or tearing the hose itself. I ended up having to disconnect it from the water pump just because of spacing. Like, there's just too many hoses going there. I couldn't get onto the clamp down here. But it's not necessary, but I took the serpentine belt off first because I don't like getting them soaked in coolant. It messes with them a little bit. But once I got this disconnected, I just pushed it down towards my bucket, and you see it did kind of go a little bit everywhere, which I was trying to avoid, but not always capable of. So now we're going to install this flush kit because I need to flush out all the crap and the Dexcool, because I'm going to end up filling this with ethylene glycol. So you have to find the heater hose, which I'm going to use this one right here. You just slice it and you splice in this T, and then we'll go. Alright, we got the T in, and some notes on this. As much as I hate this style of clamp, because it's such a pain to get to on multiple places, it is set up to where it will not crush plastic fittings, because it's shaped for the size of the hose directly over the plastic, or aluminum in this case. But this kit comes with this style of clamp for this plastic T, so you have to be careful not to over tighten them, or you will crack the plastic fitting and it'll leak everywhere. So I usually go on the low side, and then once I get everything running, if it leaks a little bit, then I just snug it up just a little bit at a time till it stops leaking. So now that that's hooked up and we're ready to turn the hose on, I need to reconnect this hose. The kit directions tells you to just let it vent over through the cap of the overflow, but because of kind of its placing in the engine bay, it's just going to run over everywhere, including the battery. So instead, I'm going to disconnect the hose coming in the bottom of it and just run it down to my bucket. So obviously the fitting leaks a little bit, but it's water. It's not too bad. It'll dry out. But something funny I noticed was the hose runs a little bit higher pressure than the normal engine water pump. And I really found my leak once we started running this through. Look at how much. Look at that. That T is usually where they leak coolant out of if it does start leaking externally. They crack, and just because they're plastic and they get heat cycled so many times. I do have a new metal one that I will be replacing these with, and I'll show you those when we get to installation. So we've got our hookup still on, running it for the directions, no more than 5 minutes. Until the fluid that comes out is clear out the drain. So we're all done with the flush. Everything was great. Water is all clear running out of it into the bucket, so went ahead and disconnected the hose, shut it off, took off the adapter, and took the hose off to drain it again, because you're going to want to empty before you take off the intake manifold, or water will run into even more water will run into the oil pan. We're going to get some in there regardless. It's unavoidable, which is why you have to change the oil after you do this job. So as you can see, we've started digging into actually removing the intake itself. Have to remove the alternator because there is a bolt hiding back here. So all the bolts that I remove, I put back in so I don't lose where they went to. The harness is old and pretty stiff, so I don't really mark any of the connectors, because when you lay it back down, they'll more or less line up with where they used to go. I did have to pop this out of the fuel rail so that it will flip over with the electrical harness. For the fuel fittings, they just have these little simple plastic clips, squeeze them together, and the fuel line slides up and off. There was this vacuum tube, which slides onto the intake manifold, or on the throttle body right there, and it just has a little squeeze clip. You squeeze it together and it slides off of this little solenoid here. But just disconnect all your electrical connectors, all your injectors, and flip. It should just about come up out of the way once you get it out of all the clips, and then it'll be out of your way so that you can take, oh, I missed one. Missed the temp sensor. Should flip up out of the way, and that way you can take the intake off. But our next step will be taking off this fuel rail. You just have to unbolt all the mounting points, and then the injectors slide up and out of their holes, and then we'll be on to the plenum, and then we're gonna have to disconnect these throttle cables here real quick. Now for this one, you're going to have to, if I can get it to focus on it, you're gonna have to rotate this around, and then this just slides forward off of it. It's just held on by the tension of the cable itself. The other one is this little bushing here. Focus. There you go. So you have to slide this cable up until it rotates around for this groove. There's a groove right here where my thumbnail is, and then that slides out this way in order to get it out. But I can't do all of that and record at the same time, so you'll just see the end result. Alright, so I've got the hose disconnected. I had to, you have to anyways, because it's going to come off with the manifold. This is a good time to change your thermostat if you have one on hand. I don't have one on hand, so I'm not even going to pop that off yet. There is a hidden little bracket down here you got to take the bolt out of, and this guard bracket right here wrapped around the EGR right back there, and it had a mounting bolt right here and on this stud right here. Now I'm going to pop off the plenum because it makes it a lot easier to get the angle for the bolts for the actual intake manifold itself. Some people don't, they just take this off as one entire assembly. I have the gaskets in the kit that I got to change the plenum gaskets, so I'm just going to go ahead and pull it all. There are these three right here. There's a stud hidden right under there you got to get to, and then around on the back side you have those three, and there is a stud here as well, the same one that the EGR guard bolts onto, and another hidden one right here, and that should all come off as one piece. And I'll just slide it up. I'll have to shimmy it around this bracket a little bit, but then slide it up and out from underneath the harness. So now we have it off, and you can see it was just leaking oil out of everywhere up top here off the plenum. And when you're lifting it up, you got to get it high enough that it slides up over the EGR pipe, but still gets around this bracket on the throttle body. I'll show you what the underside of it looks like. But it's, you can see where oil had been crossing the gasket. All the bolts were covered in oil, which should be on the outside of the sealing surface. So I'll have to clean this up really well before it goes back together with the new gasket. So I've got the bolts out of the EGR pipe. This is just a swivel bracket, and the bolt goes through it into the intake manifold. And I did it off the other side too. The reason being that any solid tubing is a lot easier to get out if you disconnect both sides of it. Then it just comes out real easy like that. I am going to put some anti-seize on that because that nut was really rusted on there. Anything that gets real hot like exhaust, it's going to do that. It'll make it oxidize faster, so you want to put some anti-seize on it so that nut, it doesn't get permanently locked on there. Now all we have left are the bolts for the lower intake manifold, and there are two hidden ones. There's one down there, and out of the way of the harness, one right there. And we'll pop this off here and take a look at the gasket under. So thanks to all the oil sitting in here, I forgot that there's actually two more bolts. There's one there under all the oil, and there's one in here under all the oil. So good times. I gotta get those two out and then they'll come out. But so far all the other bolts look absolutely disgusting. That gasket is completely fried. So this is even worse than I thought, because not only did the gasket just completely fall apart after I removed the manifold, coolant passages are completely plugged on two of these. Like, that is a solid block. This one is a little less solid, but still, that should not be like that at all. I have never seen it like that before. Someone probably used stop leak to try and seal it up, seal up the intake manifold leak, and instead they blocked up the block. So man, I hope these head gaskets hold out, because this end of the block wasn't getting near the coolant flow that it should, really, because of that. So I was partially wrong, because this is just completely blocked off on the lower intake. So coolant wasn't actually flowing through there, but given all this chunky shit, someone definitely used stop leak to try and stop the intake leak. And it just, because those pathways just end there, that's where it all sat and built up. So I'm going to try and dig all that out of the heads, and hopefully I can get most of it out of there. And then we'll clean all this up and put in the new gaskets. The gaskets for these are weird because they are 4-piece. There's 2 pieces like this, one on either end. And then there's the gaskets that go along where it mates with the head. And that's part of the reason why these fail all the time, is they aren't one piece, and it depends a lot on using a lot of RTV in between them to hold it together, which degrades much faster than the gaskets themselves. So, second hiccup on the intake manifold gasket from hell. This little plastic elbow, which was spraying out earlier, it was actually spraying out from this side. Right here is the lip where the seal should go, and there should be like another piece that's all widened out like this again. So that's still stuck in there that I've got to figure out how to dig out. And that's aluminum, so I got to be careful not to scratch it too, or else it won't seal. Yay. Alright, so we got the little piece of the elbow out of there. That was what was still stuck in there. And we got the heads all cleaned out. I put a shop vac over the hole and used a hook pick to just dig it all out, and it was all the way down there to the bottom. It was absolutely disgusting. So next we're going to clean up the surfaces. I'm used to Subarus with aluminum heads, so I use a plastic scraper blade because I don't want to scratch the surfaces. If those are iron heads, which I'm not 100% sure, then you can probably use steel and be okay. Just do not scratch the sealing surface. After I get all the old gasket material and oil scraped up, hit it with the good old brake clean and a rag, and we'll be ready to start sealing this back up. So I've got the sealing surfaces about as clean as I can get them. It's never going to be perfect, especially without a parts cleaner, which I do not have. So we're going to go ahead and start putting in the gaskets, the important part are these corners where the pieces of the gaskets meet. You have to have RTV, especially in those two corners and these two up on the front, so that it will actually seal up and not leak. You don't want to use too much. The one that I took off here had way too much RTV, and it was actually hanging down into the lifter valley. So I'm going to go ahead and put those gaskets on and then set this intake on there. Now, as you can see, I mainly put the silicone across this edge because the little pieces that go in between, they just go down like that, and that's really the only sealing surface. So I usually do it. They set just down in there like that. These little stubs go in those little holes to help align it. These have stubs on them as well. There's one right there and one right there, and they help hold it in and align it. I'll put a little RTV on those stubs as well to help hold them in place while I'm setting the intake in case the intake tries to knock it out. But you really want to be easy with it. You don't want to get it down in the lifter valley, or else it can end up in your oil system and block up your oil filter. Alright, our RTV's on. One last thing. This is our new steel elbow. I always put Vaseline on the seals. It helps it slide in a lot easier, and it's safe to use with oil, fuel, or coolant. Any seal really you should lubricate. Helps it last longer and helps install go easier. And it slides in down there in the hole in the tensioner bracket and in here. So I'm going to install it in the tensioner bracket first and angle it up so that I can slide the intake manifold onto it and then flip it down onto the seals, and then I'll start dropping the bolts in. Alright, so she's all bolted down. The new steel elbow is all tucked up underneath there. And I got the EGR pipe hooked up. Do not forget that before you put on the plenum, or you're going to be taking it off again in order to put that on. So now that everything's torqued there, I went and already put on the new gasket on this plenum and covered everything liberally in Vaseline. It's like Frank's Red Hot. So we're going to go ahead and set this on there, remembering to slide it back underneath the harness, but it has to go over the top of the EGR pipe and slide down onto it. So we have the plenum on and all bolted down. One thing I did notice was that these bolts were starting to try and round. So they're torqued down as much as I could do with it, trying to round them out. Even with a 6-point socket, they were trying to round off. So that's about as best as I can do on that. Went and got my thermostat, so I'm going to be putting that in next. You just put the rubber seal on it, Vaseline it so it sits down in there and seals, and then put on the cap. And then I'm going to start hooking up electrical connectors, and we're about done here. So I went ahead and replaced the seals on these injectors because the kit came with new ones and the other ones were a little squared off. Just when you go to set the fuel rail back on there, make sure that the mounting brackets line up with the studs and that all your injectors are setting in the ports before you start to push down. Those seals just slide into there and seal in that port, and all that actually holds it on are these studs. So the injector rail is all mounted and tight. I've started laying the harness back out. What I normally do is just lay it out where it goes, start putting it in the clips, and a lot of the connectors will line up with where they originally went. Now I put silicone grease in all my connectors. That's a habit from off-roading to keep water out of the connectors. It is not necessary, but if you live in somewhere where you'd have to drive through floodwaters a lot, it's something that'll keep water out of the electrical side and make it more secure, give you less shorts. There we go, everything is back together. The alternator is remounted. I did notice that the bolts are steel going into an aluminum bracket, so I went ahead and put anti-seize on all those, as over time mixing of metals can cause it to corrode faster, and those will lock in there, or they will rip the threads out of the aluminum bracket itself. So belt's back on, all hoses are attached. So I'm going to go ahead and On the suggestion of a friend, I'm going to add a little bit of radiator flush cleaner from Prestone. You put the whole bottle in and add water, and you drive around till it heats up. Drive around for a little bit longer, bring it back, drain it all out, and then you actually put in coolant. I wouldn't normally do that, but considering how much junk I found inside the intake, I want to make sure I get all those chunks of the old Dexcool out of the system so that we don't have any problems with clogged heater cores in the future. Alright, the oil was changed. She's all serviced up with the water and the flush fluid. She's running good. Already checked for leaks. Not leaking at the elbow or at the corners of where the intake manifold sits. You can see the RTV there. It's a little harder to see it on the other side. The thermostat is not leaking. None of our hoses are leaking, so everything's good. She's ready for the test drive and go get her warmed up. So just got back from driving it, about 10 miles roughly, going through the suburbs and highway driving to give it a good mix. Had the heat with the defrost going per the directions on the Prestone coolant flush. Really, it runs about the same, in all honesty, as it did before. That's the thing about GMs. I complain about the intake leaking a lot on a lot of these 3800s, but it's not going to make the car stop running. GM set up the ECU to where it will tolerate a lot. So as the ECU adjusts to not chugging coolant and oil anymore, I should see better fuel mileage, and I won't have to add any fluids anymore. Should be the only real differences that I notice. But I hope this has helped you guys out. It's been about a decade since I've done one of these, and it's my first L2 video, so hope you guys enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button, and mostly what I'll be doing is building stupid off-road Subarus just because they are fun. Y'all have a great day.